Happy Friday and welcome to Rising. I'm Amber Athey, joined by Jessica Burbank. Jessica, I hope you've been having a great week so far.
Yeah, so far so good, but things get better every time we do Rising Friday together.
I agree. We've got a pretty amazing show for you today. Jess, why don't you take it away?
Well, Amber, it's been revealed through FOIA requests that President Joe Biden allegedly used the fake name Robert L. Peters when emailing his son's business associates, including using it to schedule secret calls with the president of Ukraine at the time. House Committee on Oversight and Accountability Chairman James Comer has called on the National Archives and Records Administration to provide records related to then Vice President Biden's official duties that might have overlapped with his son's activities in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Democrat Representative Dan Goldman had this to say about Hunter Biden business associate and friend Devon Archer on CNN last night. Let's watch.
And in fact, what we do know is that the only official action the president took related to Hunter Biden's business interests was detrimental to Hunter Biden's company business interest. It was detrimental to Burisma, as Devon Archer, this new star witness for the Republicans, said, because the Burisma had the corrupt prosecutor general, quote, and I quote the witness, under control, and that was a good thing for that prosecutor general to be in office, and yet Joe Biden urged Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, to fire that prosecutor general. That's the only connection that President Biden had with any of Hunter's business dealings.
Journalist Glenn Greenwald reacted to Goldman's characterization of Archer, tweeting, "The reason Representative Dan Goldman is the new hero of American liberals isn't just that he's the heir to the billionaire Levi Strauss fortune. They worship those with unearned wealth, nor that he was on the Mueller team, but that he's willing as Adam Schiff, to blatantly lie." So bold statement there from Glenn Greenwald. I think his characterization of liberals is quite a funny one. But yeah, shocking revelation. It seems that this reporting is just coming from James Comer, that Robert L. Peters was the alias the vice president was using, but that the House Oversight Committee has some information on it. We haven't heard from Democrats about this. The Daily Mail obtained a letter with Joe Biden using this alias, and they've asked for more documentation and unredacted letters to really prove that Joe Biden was potentially colluding with Burisma, doing business with his son, and using this alias. But it doesn't seem that we have concrete evidence yet. They haven't released the letters, but this is coming from Comer and the Oversight Committee.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear based on just the context of the emails that they've released so far that this pseudonym couldn't belong to anybody else. I mean, we have this email between Robert L. Peters, as he's called, and a staffer for the vice president's office. So they're communicating through this weird back channel. And the only person that's copied on the email besides those two is coincidentally Hunter Biden. And in this email, they discuss this meeting that they're planning to have with the then president of Ukraine. And we know that Biden, as vice president at the time, was involved in Ukrainian matters and that he had bragged about his ability to get Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor at the time who was looking into Burisma, fired. And this is not the only pseudonym that Joe Biden is accused of using. There's another one that is Peter Henderson. And there have been several emails between this so-called Peter Henderson and Hunter Biden where he does sign the emails "Love Dad." It seems like they've been using all kinds of code names for Joe Biden throughout the past 10, 20 years in order to try to have some level of deniability in regards to Joe Biden's connection to Hunter Biden's business dealings. And then there's another thread of this that makes it even more, I think, believable that these pseudonyms did in fact belong to Joe Biden, which is that Hunter Biden, according to the release of his laptop, had his father saved in his phone as Pedo Peter, which is disturbing on multiple levels. Obviously, I would love to know why he is calling his dad a pedo, whether that has anything to do with the revelations from Ashley Biden's diary about the weird showers that they had together. But in these texts where he has mom and Pedo Peter listed together, It's very clear, again, that Joe Biden is the one behind these text messages. So we have 3 different pseudonyms that are apparently being used to cover up Joe Biden's involvement. We also know that Hunter Biden has previously referred to him as the big guy and that they need to save 10% for him out of their business deals. So I just think that the evidence is overwhelming at this point, that they were clearly trying to cover up for Joe Biden by avoiding using his name so that these documents wouldn't be able to be found through a normal FOIA request.
Yeah, I think pedo Peter being your contact in your son's phone is shocking, but I went to graduate school at Brown, and at these Ivy League schools, there's a lot of rumors about former presidents and people who have served in the highest office and in the executive branch, people who have been vice presidents, secretary of states, and their kids and grandkids go to these schools. And there's a lot of rumors about Joe Biden's family and that family friends, when they go over to the Biden house for dinner and functions, that the young women are not allowed around Joe Biden or alone in a room with him. That tells me everything I need to know about who Joe Biden is. If your family friends aren't allowing the young girls of the family to be alone in a room with you, tells me a lot about Joe Biden's character. But I think what's at stake here is really trying to nail down some evidence that directly puts Joe Biden in a position where he's trying to accumulate more wealth for himself or his family, and that we have evidence of that in the emails. Using the pseudonyms got in the way of them initially getting this evidence via FOIA. Now I think they need to look into, were there other identities used and other accounts used in these financial transactions? I think they really need that to nail this down. Makes sense that Joe Biden, communicating under another name is what initially got in the way of those Freedom of Information Act requests to get those records. But now that they have some pseudonyms that they're confident they can link to Joe Biden, this opens up a lot of room for them to investigate, okay, were there other identities used for these financial transactions? So I think that needs to be the next step in investigating. But I also think we do need some more evidence just that this pseudonym was definitely Joe Biden's.
Yeah, I agree that the next step is definitely to look in those financial transactions and see if any of these names were indeed used on the accounts in order to hide the fact that these payments were potentially going to Joe Biden. I want to go back for a moment as well to Representative Dan Goldman's interview on CNN, because he did in fact lie about the nature of Devon Archer's testimony. And it's actually not the first time that he's done that. So what he said in that interview was the claim that Devon Archer asserted that firing Shokin didn't help Burisma at all because Burisma had Shokin, quote, under control, and that he wasn't actually investigating the company. But this is a complete misinterpretation, perhaps deliberately, of what Devon Archer actually said in his testimony. If you look at the full transcript, we see that Devon Archer was explaining that the narrative that was spun to him by DC consultants was that Burisma had Shokin under control. And of course, they have an interest in spinning that narrative to try to downplay Biden's culpability in helping Burisma get out of potential prosecution from Victor Shokin. Devon Archer never says that he believed that narrative or that he found it compelling, only that that's what the DC suits were trying to spin. Now, the other time that Dan Goldman misrepresented Devon Archer's testimony was actually before the transcript came out. He was all over cable news talking about how all that Devon Archer testified to was that Joe Biden was there to give the, quote, illusion of access, that Hunter Biden was going to give the illusion that he had this direct line to his father. Well, it turns out the illusion of access quote was one that was made up by Dan Goldman. It was never said by Devon Archer. It was only brought into the transcript because Dan Goldman used it in a question to Devon Archer. And Devon Archer made very clear in his full testimony that given Joe Biden was on at least 20 phone calls with Hunter Biden's business associates, and now we have this email from Robert L. Peters scheduling a call with the president of Ukraine, it was obviously more than just an illusion of access. The access existed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of the evidence that we have so far points to the fact that whatever it is, if it's the illusion of access or it's actual access, that the Biden family used their influence during the time he was in office to accumulate more wealth. And I think that becomes clear when you just look at the compensation that Hunter Biden had when he was on the board of Burisma, that it went from $83,000 a month to half of that just 2 months after Joe Biden wasn't in office anymore. That tells you everything you need to know about those who are of the most influential families in the United States will be compensated greatly by multinational corporations, not just for directly influencing foreign policy relations and, trying to nudge Ukraine to get Viktor Shokin out of office because he was prosecuting Burisma, which, by the way, that narrative in DC that Burisma had Viktor Shokin under control could just very well be the result of them believing having Hunter Biden on the board would give them, control over the prosecutors in Ukraine and Viktor Shokin's influence over what was going on in the company. And so I think all of the evidence that points to corruption among the Biden family and Burisma is there. Are we going to be able to get those financial records with Joe Biden by name or an alias that is concretely, linked to Joe Biden as being him, the one sending the emails or executing the financial transactions or asking for the money from Burisma? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that there's enough there from the Oversight Committee that it's time for them to start drafting legislation so this doesn't happen again. To me, it doesn't really matter if we nail the Bidens or not in this case, so long as going forward they write legislation to prevent this from happening again. And I think they've kind of opened a can of worms here, because I think there are a lot of people in DC and in Congress that are either friends with Comer and the executives on the House Oversight Committee. They are friends with people that have really pushed for this investigation of Hunter Biden that are up to very similar things when it comes to making deals with lobbyists, making deals with the executives of multinational corporations, and using their influence to get a little bit more money in exchange for passing policy or enacting foreign policies that result in them getting compensated a little bit more, doing these kinds of favors. And it's going to be really tough to write legislation that's, anti-corruption legislation that can prevent this in the future. But I think they have a lot of friends in high places that wouldn't like for them to do that.
Yeah, legislation would be well and good, but I think it would be a tragedy to not hold the Biden family accountable for this. If they are able to get that concrete evidence, then Joe Biden should be removed from office, especially considering he's sending tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine every few months. I mean, what impact did his previous tenure as vice president and his son's involvement in Ukraine have potentially on now using tons of taxpayer money to help support their war efforts? And unfortunately, the Oversight Committee seems to be the only people taking this investigation seriously. This special counsel appointment of David Weiss, the U.S. attorney in Delaware, is clearly an attempt to continue to slow walk the investigation and allow the statute of limitations to run out on Hunter Biden's financial crimes. So we're pretty reliant right now on Congress to hopefully do their job and hold these people accountable. We'll be back with more Rising after this.